Innovation is the genesis of new industry, but new ideas can die very quickly without proper nurturing. Policymakers in the Middle East see new industry as being vital to economic diversification and political stability. So what should they be doing to help entrepreneurs take their ideas from the drawing board to the marketplace? Here to shed some light on the matter is INSEAD Professor Stephen Mezias. Professor, welcome to INSEAD Knowledge.
Thank you.
Professor, why is entrepreneurship so important to emerging industries and to economic and social development?
Well, really, I believe the course of history over the last 2 centuries, 3 centuries, industrialization changed it. But really, we see founding of new firms and new industries being the engine that drives economic development and growth. I would claim it's impossible to understand industrialization without taking a perspective on it being both an entrepreneurial and a new sector kind of phenomenon.
The vast majority of new firms go out of business very quickly, even more so in new industries. And governments in the Middle East are channeling a lot of funds into innovation and entrepreneurship. Are they spending the money in the wrong areas, or are there other obstacles to be considered?
Well, I don't think there's anything any government can do to change the fact that the vast majority of new firms go out of business. For example, the vast majority of people who intend to found a firm never found a firm. The vast majority of people who found a firm, it dies very quickly before they ever employ another person. The small remaining minority of firms that actually get founded and survive to have more than 1 or 2 employees tend to grow very slowly, and it's a relatively small number of firms that ever make it from startup to small or medium enterprise, and that's a fact that I don't think can be changed.
So how can governments encourage new industries and encourage firms in specific industries?
Well, our perspective on it is they can make networking easier. And our study shows that firms that have network connections to important stakeholders that control resources are far more likely to survive than firms that don't have network connections. In fact, what we did was we ran a baseline condition where there are no network connections, and then a condition where there are network conditions, and the survival rates increased dramatically. We went to computer simulation because it's so difficult to observe the processes of interest. Most new firms, no one knows they're being founded. Most kind of bodies that keep track of new firms don't notice a new industry or a new firm until long after it's well established. And our interest was really in trying to look at the very beginning, what things can make a difference. And our findings really suggest that network connections are absolutely critical. Clearly, putting people in the same place is one way to try to make sure that network ties happen. People who are close to one another in physical space are more likely to communicate with one another than people that are more distant. But I think we also want to think about what kinds of ties might be necessary where physical space alone won't be enough to encourage the communication that our study suggests is necessary.
So what sort of ties are these?
Well, I guess very specific knowledge ties. So if the knowledge you need for your new industry, let's say it was semiconductors, is housed at university departments of electrical engineering, materials engineering, departments that study manufacturing process, we really have to think about, well, how do we get that specialized knowledge into the space so that people are exchanging it to create the industries that depend on this specialized knowledge. And I think simply setting up a hub isn't enough. Clearly, for example, Silicon Valley is a hub, but I don't think Silicon Valley was successful simply because a bunch of people in high-tech industries were close to one another. I think one has to look at Stanford University and its role in creating the Silicon Valley cluster, and get even more specific, Stanford Engineering and the role of specific people that really proselytized knowledge and new industry creation.
Should the governments be helping to set up these ties?
I think the government can help people communicate about the kinds of information they need, what's missing, and try to provide the missing links. Again, I guess we can wait until it happens naturally. I don't really think the visible hand of government was particularly important to the Silicon Valley story. I think putting people together and then giving them a platform where they can exchange information and giving them access to the government policymakers that can facilitate help when they need it is important. For example, if you put the people together, they're speaking to one another, and they discover that the process for licensing a new firm in this particular location, municipality, region, country, is extremely difficult, then I think what you want is a process where this communicating group, the people with the network ties, can communicate what they believe together to be the challenges and the problems to a policymaker who can actually try to do something about it.
And networking between small companies, will this help create a united image for the new product or the new brand? Will it help give it legitimacy?
Well, I think certainly early on in the stages of a new industry, most entrepreneurs and most people involved with the small firms understand that getting the word out about what we're doing is important. That may be complicated when there's specific proprietary technologies that people are reluctant to share. So the dynamics can be very complicated, but I think the short answer to your question is yes. I think most entrepreneurs in new fields understand that getting the word out about what they're doing is absolutely critical.
And this is what attracts the investors.
Certainly getting investors to understand what we're doing and the business model itself is important. And to the extent that there are shared characteristics across the firms in terms of activities and business models, then a group effort to make that communication can clearly have benefits for all.
Policymakers somewhere like the Middle East, like the UAE, where they're really striving to diversify, and they have set themselves goals of what areas they want to diversify into, how should they be spending their money then?
Well, they should be spending their money trying to make sure that the kinds of social information and technical information that's required for those sectors is present in a defined space, and then they should try to bring potential entrepreneurs into that space, and by having that correct mix on the ground, try to make sure that the sectors take off in the way they would like to see. With regard to that specific question, we see that South Korea has formed an alliance between the TV manufacturers and the university departments that engage in electrical engineering to really become a world leader on light-emitting diodes, so that light-emitting diodes become a base technology for the Korean television industry to gain competitive advantage over, in this case specifically Japan, but even more generally. So again, a government can sponsor the kind of research, can make sure that the universities receive funding for the kind of basic research that's necessary, and I think they can even play a role in trying to create the ties between industry and university.
Professor Mezias, thank you for being with us at INSEAD Knowledge.
Thanks, Jane. My pleasure.